today and Thursday we'll be looking at Van Gogh. Some people get more press than others. And there's, by the way, that online thing for Seurat, 2 small ones. One's about a half an hour, the other one's about 20 minutes, so it's less than the time that we missed. One of them just talks about Seurat's works in general. The other one talks about the reading that we had from Knockland on how Seurat's works counters the idea of utopia. So that will be included on the exam. Make sure you send those back to me, make up for the class last week before Thanksgiving. Okay? I think you should be able to hear it pretty well. I didn't say it back, but I even used the microphone this time because people complained about it being kind of muddled. Right? Okay, so today and Friday we'll be looking at Van Gogh. He was a latecomer when it comes to making art. Van Gogh only started making art when he was in his late 20s, almost 30 years old, right, 27, 28, when he finally started making art. He had started working in business, but his father was a missionary, a Christian missionary. And Van Gogh started his life wanting to follow in his father's footsteps. Right? He only came around to making art after the church sort of sacked him. He wasn't really good at it, right? He was a pretty horrible missionary, apparently. And he got sort of removed from his missionary post, and at that point he decided to sort of think, maybe I'll look into art instead. He's got one of the, like Toulouse-Lautrec, he's got one of these fabled biographies where, we know quite a bit about him, and we start to talk about his works autobiographically, because there does seem to be such a tight connection between his personality, events in his life, and the works that he produces. Because he started so late 20s or so, he's only actually an active artist for about 10 years, not much more than that. He starts making art around 1879, 1880, and he is dead in 1890. Right? Only makes art for 10 years or so. And as you might guess, he dies before he's 40. As you probably know, a suicide. Although there's some very recent attempts to suggest that he might have been murdered. Yes, he was shot in the chest. And it took him like a day and a half to die, which is pretty horrible if you think about it, right? I mean, who shoots themselves in the chest? Somebody wants to suffer, I guess, but it's not, Elliott Smith, the emo guy, started off as a punk rocker in Portland, stabbed himself like 17 times. Pretty horrible thing. Great music, though. Van Gogh, great. Anyway, what's interesting is that in that 10-year span, right, only 10 years, and really committed to painting for only about 5 of them. First I started sketching in one year. So he's really committed to it for only about 5 years. My goodness, 1,250 paintings in a 10-year span. Huh? Right? Think about 10 a month. Right? That works out to be, if he did them equally over this amount of time. And over 1,000 drawings as well. And his drawings, are not just sketches, they're really good. And add to that printmaking, the thing on the right is a lithograph, right? An incredible amount of output in a very, very short period of time. Which is, in itself, pretty phenomenal, right? But I think it's because he's got a zeal. He's got a religious fervor that what drove him to want to be a missionary drives him to want to make art. He sees his art as being more than simply decorative. He sees his art as having a very, very solid and definable social agency. It has a role to play, right? He sees his art as something that can change the life of the viewer, change the point of view of the viewer, change the opinion, but also can benefit sometimes the people that he actually illustrates. Okay. So, as a missionary, before he even started, he moves from Holland, okay, you know this, Van Gogh, right, Van Gogh. It has actually properly pronounced as Gogh. He's from Holland. As a missionary, he moves to Belgium. So you know where Holland is, right? It's sort of northeast of France. He moves down the coast. Belgium's in between Holland and France. And he's working his way down. And as a missionary, he is deployed. Think the right word for a missionary? Sent, right? To work among the coal miners in Belgium. And this is very important for him because what we'll see in a significant number of his pictures is a deep-rooted concern with the life of the working class. Rural laborers play an incredibly strong role in Van Gogh's art. The life of rural laborers. Right? And so with these two works, we see these rural laborers. Shortly after he's turned to art, he's back in Holland. A man polishing his boots. I think it's probably the same guy. Look at those mutton chops, right? I hope it's the same guy. I hope there's not a lot of people wearing that facial hair. You know, the Neil Young circa 1972, only older than all of that. As to why he's called an orphan man, I'm not 100% sure. But nonetheless, both of these shows are the mundane, everyday details of working class people. Elevated, aggrandized to the level of high art. Right? Drawn on the left, and then that drawing becoming one of many that he eventually turns into a stone lithography, right? And if you think about the whole idea of printmaking, the point of printmaking is that you want your visual work to reach a wider audience. That's why you make prints, right? You get to keep the matrix, but you can, at Christmas time, make them for all your neighbors. For Van Gogh, he wants more people to see his images that extol the grandeur of the working class. And printmaking becomes part of that. That's not the only. And you want to make money as well, right? Printmaking is a nice way to make money, so there's that as well, right? Well, when he got dismissed from his missionary duties and turned his life to art, this was 1879, winter of 1879, so, December 79, January 1880. He goes to the north of France, just across the Belgian border, to visit Jules Breton, a prominent painter living outside of Paris in the rural area between Paris and Belgium, right? So northeastern France. And he visits Breton's studio, and this is apparently a turning point in his life. Breton had been continuing to work all the way into the 1880s in what we call the realist style. Then we talked about that toward the beginning of class. Realism as a movement. Not realistic, but committed to images of the real world. Right? The reality of existence. And in particular, the reality of existence for the rural working class. Right? And Breton remains committed to making these paintings that extol the virtues of hard labor, the dignity of the downtrodden, right? The people who have to work for a living. Who needs to show the dignity of kings, right? They've got it all. Breton's picture, if you've seen it, it's almost life size. It's huge, this picture is, right? There at the National Gallery. It's terrific. Showing the harvesting of these seeds. Have you seen this before? Haven't we? Did I show this to you before or not? Maybe I put it on the Marymount Facebook feed, the Marymount Finance Facebook feed. I think I did on Labor Day, as a matter of fact, I put it up. Like us on Facebook. We put things up. I put things up all the time. Comments on Works of Art. In any event, they're harvesting the seed that's actually used to make canola oil, right? Rapeseed is. And now they're harvesting the statuesque figures looming over the landscape. Labor as difficult, but at the same time dignified. Breton had a huge influence on Van Gogh. Really shifted his career was instrumental in his career shift from missionary work to painting. And the idea that he's going to help people by enlightening his viewers to things they might not otherwise see comes right out of this same missionary fervor, right? So instead of actually preaching through words, he's now going to sort of preach something beneficial to people through pictures. Right? After meeting Breton, he begins to research and seek out other realist painters. And in particular, the ones that focus more on the countryside rather than somebody like Manet, who's a realist painter working in the city. He didn't care about those urban scenes. He cares about the rural ones. He becomes very much interested in Millet, Jean-Francois Millet, who I think we looked at very briefly before. This one's up at the Walters in Baltimore, a potato harvest. Really the large early champion of images of the working class that attempt in one way or another to enlighten us to what their life is really like, the difficulties, the hardships they suffer, and the dignity that they can maintain despite that. I'm not saying he knew this picture in particular, but these works, these realist works, are the ones that have an ongoing influence on Van Gogh. We'll start off with these drawings, these early drawings, because we don't have many early works from in local collections. But I think as you look at these, they're fantastic drawings, for someone who's just started drawing. I mean, they're really terrific, sort of expressive, individualized qualities, good sense of anatomy, and interesting ability to render form through what, these strictly vertical strokes for their shadow kind of work pretty well. But again, interested in the working class, right? And that comes from this, revelation that he had in 1879 when he visited the studio of Jules Breton. And this pushes him to make paintings that focus on various aspects of the daily life of these people. Now, this is an awkward side-by-side. I make all of my pictures the same side, left and right. But the painting itself is huge, right? The painting is intended to make a statement, right? It's 5 or 6 feet across. It's a monster. And, of course, the lithograph that's based on it is significantly smaller, but it looks bigger here on the screen. So, art history, I'm lying to you all the time, right? But the point of making a lithograph after the scene, you can see, because of the process, he hasn't bothered to even deal with the reversal. Sometimes an artist can make the paint so that the lithograph is the same direction as the original, but he wanted to do something more immediate. He's going to win at the stone with the crayons that you use, the wax crayons, in order to make the scene in this exactly the same composition, but reversed, right? And the point of making the litho here is again this idea of not only making money, but also of allowing more than just the one person or the few people that might go to that one gallery, allowing more people to see it than that. But he is very much interested in again, the plight of the working class. He has a slightly caricaturous style when it comes to the facial features, but I think in many ways what he's trying to do is show their non-idealized, individualized existence and closer to the land and, kind of beat up by it. But without making them the subject of mockery. Okay? Now you'll notice with the potato eaters that his palette at this point is also incredibly dark. Right? And it's a nighttime scene lit by that one lamp in the center with the beacon of red. But the majority of it is this sort of dark, umbery, sort of forest green, brown sort of tonality. And that's typical for a lot of Van Gogh's pictures in the early part of the 1880s. While he's still working in Holland, while he's just getting started. And the Potato Eaters was for him a coming out party, if you will. Party's not the right word, but a coming out statement is his first major picture, right? And intended to sort of proclaim what he's hoping to do. Right? So he's a realist painter, even though we're at the period, at the end of the Impressionist period, right? 1885 is the year before the very last Impressionist exhibition. By the time he gets to Paris, the Impressionists are done, right? He goes to Paris the next year, okay? That said, it's important to remember that the realist movement never went away. One branch of the realist movement did morph into Impressionism. The realists are all about the realism of everyday life. That is exactly what the Impressionists are doing. But with the idea of painting outside, but with the idea of broken brushwork that leads to an optical mixture, right? A sketchy quality, an impression. that comes out of the realist movement, but that doesn't mean the other realists all follow suit. And we can find paintings by realist painters, especially in Holland and Belgium, all the way into the 1890s, deep into the 1890s. And in America, the realist movement doesn't end until the 1910s. Russia goes on until the 1940s. Right? This is a permanent movement that has legs. Just one part of it shifts to Impressionism. So everywhere we look, especially the area where Van Gogh is, this is still kind of a rage. Right? So what he's doing early on is sort of falling into step with what is the common trend of art in the 1880s, these scenes of the working class, downtrodden. Right? Frédéric is the Belgian, Joseph Israel, who we had up before, is Dutch. Right? But these are intended to show sort of the impact of industry on the rural working class, and in many ways how difficult their life can be. Look at that poor, the barrel's broken apart, right? His socks and pants all torn up and whatnot. And that goes, potato eaters is going to kind of do the same thing. And what we'll see is the life of the rural worker is something that appears consistently throughout Van Gogh's career. Right? So it's established here early on, and it comes out of his interest in being a missionary, I think, to begin with. Right? Working through a few more of the drawings, I love this as a postcard. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. Anyway, he's talking about his paintings. I know that certainly because of the point is what he's drawing. Right? There's a couple of peasants here hoeing a field, right? With their hands, not with an industrial hoe or even with any other than back-breaking labor. But you can see the hedgerow, whatever we call it, the furrow that they dug. That's all the one guy working with the shovel while the woman comes forward and plants the seed into that area. Right? This is something that will dominate the output of his career through the decade that he's painting and drawing. It's not everywhere. There are plenty of pictures without people in them, and there are pictures of towns and cities. But at the same time, this is a theme that you can't ignore in his works. Right? Notice that the drawing style is kind of rough I don't mean that in a bad way. But you notice that he seems to be using a reed pen, like a very stiff-nibbed reed pen, to make those marks. So this is sort of scratchy quality, sort of an unflexible quality to the line, like they've been made with something rather stiff. And you can even see there's a bit there where the ink smudged off to the right, as he's working his way through this. So again, peasant life, right? Everywhere we look in Van Gogh's work. National Gallery has one early picture by Van Gogh from when he was in Holland, this picture of flower beds. And it's a man working a tulip field. The Dutch were famous for tulips. They loved them. Right? In the 17th century, there was this mania for tulips that drove the price higher than gold. Not the case in the 19th century, but there was ongoing interest in raising flowers. And here we see a farmer working his flower field. Ostensibly more colorful, certainly, than the potato eaters, but of course the subject matter mandates that, doesn't it? It's flower fields, after all. It can't just be all gray, brown, and green. But at the same time, you'll notice that there's a certain dinginess to it, a deeply clouded sky, dead trees. I don't want to say dead, but dormant trees. Right? Working through the winter seems to be one of the themes here, if you will, working through the fall or into the early part of the spring before the trees have actually bloomed. Maybe part of the message is making the land do what you want it to when it wants to do something else. Right? When it wants to be asleep, you've got it awake. That's the result of his hard work. And even though there's quite a bit of color to the flowers, and they're rather bright, they could be a whole lot brighter. And as we look at later Van Gogh, after he moves out of Holland, where I lived in Belgium for 2 years. It is gray, man. It's like this. This is a bright day in Belgium. You know what we're having today. It's like, it gets light in the morning at 9. It gets dark in the afternoon at 3. It's wet, like wet. I come from Oregon, and I thought that was wet in Holland, in Belgium. It is something else, right? And he captures, I think, that sort of preternaturally gray quality of the Dutch world. When we look at the colors themselves, it's interesting in that in these early works, his paint is somewhat different. It's much more descriptive. So you'll notice that with each of the beds of the different flowers, the colors are fairly localized, right? So the pink flowers are pink. And where you see green, it's the grass coming up through it, or it's the stalks of the flowers, right? It's really descriptive. He's not doing anything sort of expressive with it yet, but rather the color is the color that he sees. So the blue flowers are blue, the red flowers are red, the white flowers are white. And the other colors that are there are not there for some sort of optical mixture on your part, but they're there to describe something that you see, right? And that's true everywhere that you look. So the reason I'm pointing this out is that after he moves to Paris, and from there moves to the south of France, that will change, right? Van Gogh's paint application will move from descriptive paint to subjective color choices, where he amplifies it beyond description to be something that has an emotional impact instead, via optics, right? But early on, while I'm still in Holland, he's using, when he uses color, he's using it for a very different purpose. Right? Well, 1886, he moves to Paris. This is done in Richmond. It's a fairly small work, as you can probably tell. Again, all of my slides are lying to you. One of these days I'll figure out how to put them up there to scale, but it would take a lot of time. But here's a laundry boat moored on the bank, so it's a boat where you could take your laundry to be washed by a washerwoman. You can tell he's in France, right? He's got the French flag flying from it, so that's there as well. He's right on the Seine itself, outside of Paris, at the town of Asnières. It's about 5 miles outside of Paris. Has anybody played back the Seurat things yet that I put up online that I wrote you about this weekend? Probably not, because I know it's the end of the semester and you've got other things to do. Suffice to say, that's Asnières, right? This famous game by Seurat that we had a reading about, right? The Grand Shot sits in the middle of the Seine River, big island, right? And so there's water, obviously. Water on the side and over here and back over here as well on the right. And Asnières is kind of over there on the other side of the river. Right. So if you follow that bridge across here, it's kind of distant at the sea. And as we can see more of this picture, you see the Grand Shot right where my Grand Shot is placed, right? So it's literally right across the river next to here. And Seurat painted this side of the river as well, and it's online, and we have some studies for it. So it's right in the same region that Seurat is, and you can see, roughly the same time as well. Because like when he moved to Paris, and a couple of different things, major things happened. One of them is that he came into the circle of the Impressionists. Right? And like the Impressionists, he moves to these little villages, right, these towns that are outside of Paris that we've seen again and again and again, right? We talked about Argenteuil, we talked about Pontoise, we talked about Asnières online. We've seen all of these cute little towns. By the way, I looked them up online, they're still cute. Next time I'm going to Paris, I'm going to the area around the Havre to hit those little side towns there because those are still really cute apparently. And I'm going out here, heck with Paris, right? I'm going to go out. And that's exactly what Van Gogh did, is he kind of followed the Impressionists to these little villages outside of the city. But unlike Seurat, who's right across the river from him, Seurat's picture is all about urban leisure. They're all elements of of French society, from the working class, the guy in the wife beater in the front, right, with the big pipe and the bowler hat, leaning on his elbows, lower left corner, to this incredibly elegant couple with the parasol and a pet monkey on the lower right corner, right, and everybody in between, from soldiers to little girls playing to wet nurse to a man playing a bugle, right, people rowing. It's all recreation and leisure. Van Gogh? Van Gogh, it's work. It's labor. We don't actually see the laborers, but we see the sign of labor. The laundry boat. That for him, Asnier, this cute little village outside where people are flocking to goof off on the weekend, right? On Sunday afternoon. Van Gogh doesn't see that. Van Gogh sees the signs of sort of the localized signs of labor. Right? That's very important for us in our understanding of Van Gogh. Right? So he's literally just across the river at this point. Now, let's see, where am I here? What am I missing? One of the things that we talked about online is how Seurat paints. And I'll go over here a little bit as well, but only very briefly. Seurat developed a painting style that was incredibly deliberate, but in a way that was different from Monet's deliberation. When we looked at Monet and we read an article on Monet, we talked about how deliberate it was in building up texture and then coming over the top of it, right, with the top layer of paint. But Monet always wanted it to look as if the paint application was quick, that it was spontaneous. That was an effect he was trying to fool you into thinking that these were done quickly. But Seurat, anything but, because he paints the entire picture with tiny little dots or flecks. And as you look at this, and you look at all the little red marks, and all the little blue marks, and all the little lavender marks, and all the little orange marks, you realize that this is just painstaking, right? Just coming in and dotting it, right? Up, 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 up. And then going to another color, same thing. Took him 2 years on the final canvas. Before that, he spent another year working on preparatory studies. So it's incredibly deliberate. There's nothing really, and the figures, for the most part, aren't moving at all. The little pug, the little girl in the orange dress, about the only things that are moving in the entire picture. Everybody else is frozen, solid, you know, as if they've been encased in plastic or something, right? So there's this non-spontaneous look to it. And for Seurat, this was because he'd been immersing himself in different scientific texts that were talking about color and how we perceive it. And one of the ones that he became mostly interested in was the scientific text that talked about our eyes, the physical structure of our eyes. You know about rods and cones, right? What are rods you see dark and light, and cones you see color, right? And we have many types of cones in our eyes, and each of the cones is geared to be receptive to a particular color. And it's not red, yellow, blue. It's not the primary colors. It's red, blue, green. That's why old TV sets, if you look at them very close, had those three colors. Because by mixing those optically, you can come up with the full range. And if we look at Seurat, it's predominantly red, blue, green. Right? Those three colors. And by seeing them side by side, you can then mix the entire palette of colors in between those three. Right? This is one scientific text that he's interested in. Another one was a text that talked about the fact that if you put opposites on the color wheel next to each other, you'll get a visual blending. He's steeped in these ideas, and he's applying these scientific principles about art to his painting. Okay? So it's a very particular kind of post-impressionism, Seurat is. But again, it's a dialogue between the artist and the paint, the medium. That we actually saw with Cezanne as well. Okay? So, this scientific approach that we see with Seurat, we're going to see has an impact on Van Gogh. Now, I don't know if Van Gogh ever met Seurat, even if they're in the same area. He probably did. But he doesn't seem to have been particularly close to him. When he moves to Paris, when he gets engaged with the Impressionists, he becomes good friends with our good friend, Pissarro. The grand old man of the field, right? He's up there sort of, even slightly older than Monet. But we've already talked about Pissarro a couple times over, not only his own work and his own sort of political beliefs, and how his work relates to those political beliefs, but we've also talked about Pissarro as a mentor, as someone who helps younger artists find their bearing, find their footing. And do you remember that back in, 76 or so, Pissarro had found, helped Cézanne and said, hey, Paul, time to go outside, paint with primary colors. And that whole interest in color and light actually drew Pissarro to Seurat. So in 1886, when Seurat comes up with this new pointillism, right, painting with points, Seurat goes, ooh, interesting, and starts to pick up on this later in his life, and he paints his own sort of pointillist-style pictures for a little bit in the late 80s and early 90s. And some of that pointillism even holds through. If you remember our details that we looked at when we saw the Boulevard des Italiens, the Italian boulevard, with all the tiny little flecks of paint that made up the tree. That's the legacy of him having met, Pissarro having met Seurat. So we've got this opinion of trickle-down art, right? Seurat comes up with this new theory, right? This new style of neo-impressionism, this new pointillism. Pissarro, the older artist, is inspired by that and begins to make works. He passes those ideas on to Van Gogh. Right? He's the go-between between Seurat and Van Gogh. Here he's painting in London, or outside of London. Hampton Court Green is in suburbs of London, and he gives us a nice little shot of a lawn bowling, right? Even though Pissarro was ardently socialist, we read that, right? He was an anarchist. And that would have made him really attractive, I think, to Van Gogh, right? Similar mindset about sort of the dignity of rural work and the evils of this big city, right? They're kindred spirits in that respect. Yet even here, he's giving us a little, leisure time in the bigger city. But again, not so Van Gogh. Right? So Pissarro was a huge influence on Van Gogh. He basically tells Van Gogh, ditch the dirty, muddy colors. Get some color into your work. Get more color into your work. Right? Spend some more time outside. Do some more observations. And work with color. And here, this kid Seurat, he's got some great ideas for you. And then, Van Gogh arrives, 1886, it's all the rage, this new direction of Impressionism, it's all the rage. And he says, hey, think about complementary colors next to each other. Think about visual mixing of individual strokes of paint. Right? But all expressed through color. And this will begin in Van Gogh's career to make a huge difference in what his work looks like from this point forward. Right? So this is, when he comes to Paris in 1886, this is influence number one, right? Pissarro. I guess I just wanted that up there. I was saying what I just said. Influence number two, Japan. Many artists working in Paris had become enamored with Japanese printmaking, Japanese woodblocks, multicolored woodblock prints. And I keep showing you Hiroshige because he's just like the bee's knees, he's the man when it comes to these works. And many of these works, he did it in series. So there's 100 prints of the area around Tokyo, 100 views of Mount Edo, but other series, and so many of them are so very aquatic, with water that stretches almost up to the top level of the composition. Notice how little of it's given over to sky, right? The horizon line's been put 5/6 of the way, 7/8 of the way up the top. Van Gogh's picking up on that. We have this expanse of the sand that leads our eye up to just the very smallest strip of sky above it, right, coming out of inspiration from Hiroshige. Also, I love the riverbank on the left and the way that it just slices off in a flat way half of the composition on the left of Van Gogh's work, and how it sits up straight rather than looking like it goes back in the distance. It's almost like somebody held up a piece of cardboard like that, right, and just blocked off part of the view, when in fact it's meant to be the cart path leading back into space, probably for horses to move as they pull carts up the Seine, right? And this idea of the sort of self-conscious blocking of parts of the composition is also directly related to some of the more adventurous compositions from Hiroshige. He loves putting things in the foreground that sit as these sort of flat elements through which you see the deeper landscape. And Van Gogh has turned that path into something very, very similar. Right? So this is his second major impact, right, on coming to France. They both come through the Impressionists, but one is Pissarro and the other one is Japanese prints. Right? And Van Gogh just changes the way, one changes the way that he puts the paint on the canvas. The other one changes the way he thinks about composition. Right? These are the two elements of making paintings, right? How you lay the forms out within the two-dimensional square, rectangle, and then how do you actually put the paint down when you've done that? And these are two separate things to consider, and both of them change when it comes to Paris, right? And just to prove the point, in case you don't believe me, right, that why did he not look at this stuff? Here's the print. I love this print anyway. It's a plum estate, right? So the plum tree growing around, and again that idea of blocking, right, where we actually look through the tree to see the figures. It's a terrific print, right? Well, there you go. Van Gogh's version of the same, right? He actually made copies of quite a few of these prints directly, so we know for a fact that he knew them very, very well, right? So that's just kind of to overprove the point, right? Japanese prints are another major influence on Van Gogh on arriving in Paris. Now, he lived up on the Montmartre. Remember we talked about this area, the Martyrs Mount in Paris. It's that hill sort of in the north of Paris. It's the 18th arrondissement, if you know that. It's the area where Toulouse-Lautrec lived. Now, Toulouse-Lautrec is a little bit later. I don't think they knew each other. But here Van Gogh shows us the outside of the mill that gave this pub its name. Right? So we looked at the pub scene on the left when we talked about Toulouse-Lautrec and the Moulin de la Gazette. And now we see the actual outside of that, the actual moulin, the mill, that gave it its name. It sits on top of this hill in this rather seedy, derelict, crime-infested, and fun area of Paris. But again, I don't think they overlap here. This is an actual chalk drawing of the outside of the moulin. And you can see, I think in many ways, he's been listening to Pissarro and his advice of getting out of the studio, get outside, look at the world around you. One of his very last works while in Paris is this self-portrait. This one's in Amsterdam at the Van Gogh Museum. He painted 22 different self-portraits while he was in Paris and continued to paint them after he left. In fact, very few artists painted as many self-portraits as Van Gogh did. And almost no one in the 19th century left us with such a strong visual record of how he looked through the years. If we look closely at the picture, and I've got a nice detail here, you can see that he's absorbed these pointillistic lessons, where he's got blues juxtaposed with made up of these flecks that are not descriptive anymore. When we looked at the flower beds, right? They were based on the color of the flowers that he's looking at. And now he's using color in a very different way to achieve optical effects that aren't based. He doesn't have a coat that has little flecks of orange in it. He's doing that for a painterly effect, right? How it could work on you, the viewer. You look at his face and all of the colors that are in his cheeks, right? You also see that it's not descriptive. It's not based on the colors that he's seeing, but rather it's based on these theories of colors blending on the canvas. So he's fully absorbed Sorrow's lessons into how to paint like Seurat. You'll also notice that no part of the painting is left kind of unpainted, if you will. That even though the background is ostensibly just an off-white, notice how vigorously it's been painted everywhere you look. Thickly and vigorously. And on a certain level, that sets him apart from Seurat. When you go online and look, I've got some really great details of the Seurat picture because it's part of the Google Art project. So I got it like bigger than you'll ever. My computer crashes or something, right? When you look at it, the paint's pretty thin. But for Van Gogh, it's got expressiveness. And for this reason, he thickens the paint. You'll see from this point forward. The paint application, the thickness of it is for him absolutely crucial. So the place where we find these ideas, one of the books, is Charles Blanc, Charles Blanc, The Grammar of the Art of Design. It was published in 1867, and Seurat had been reading this. And he is actually, this little bit of trivia here, he came up with the color wheel. You guys all do the color wheel, right? You take the color theory, you have to go, oh, opposite of blue is orange. Oh, opposite of yellow is purple. Charles Blanc's the one that came up with that idea, right? This is the first place it's ever been published, is that book right there. I mean, more than that copy, but this is where it came from. And this is the idea that Van Gogh is channeling, that he learned from hanging out with Pissarro, right? Probably initial attraction had nothing to do with that. Probably like Pissarro because he was doing peasant pictures, rural imagery. But it went obviously much further than that. Before we leave Paris behind with Van Gogh and follow him to the south of France, I wanted to talk about one more thing, and that's the idea of self-portraiture. The fact that Van Gogh had painted so very many pictures of himself, but also this incredibly thick paint application that he's beginning to see with this work. But it's still there even with the muddier pictures that are early. The only other artist who painted as many self-portraits as Van Gogh, well, maybe you can guess. Think of any other artist who painted a ton of self-portraits. Painted, drawn. Rembrandt. Bravo! Rembrandt, who, by the way, is Dutch, like Van Gogh, right? By the way, who paints in dark, brownish, muddy tones, like Van Gogh when he started. Who lays the paint on thick, like Van Gogh. This is not often mentioned, at least in the stuff that I read, but I think the legacy of Rembrandt for the fellow Dutchman Van Gogh is massive. Close-up of his face here, so just to get a sense of how thick Rembrandt's paint is, because the slide on the left is not so good. But you can see that he builds it up to the point. I think, Grace, you were in the class where I talked about that. It's just the brow, the skin, is the skin of the paint. It's really three-dimensional. And Van Gogh's interest in the quality, the physical, palpable, three-dimensional quality of paint, plus his interest in using self-portraits as a way of, getting to the emotional core and psyche of what it means to be alive. That with his self-portrait, he's not dressing up, he's not posing, he's not putting on a false persona. That when you look at Rembrandt, when you look at Van Gogh, you look straight through them in a way. You don't see what they look like, you see who they are. You see how they feel. You see what moves them. You see the psyche as much as you see the exterior face. Slightly later, remember, this one's in London, or outside London, Kenwood House, in Hampstead Heath, where again, that sort of unflinching look at the viewer, with the tools of his trade. And this is kind of an interesting thing for Van Gogh. He's a worker, you know? We often think of artists as being dilettantes, right? They're sort of above it all in a way, and they're not. We don't think about artists as laborers. But Van Gogh did. Art was for him his job. Art was for him work. Now, if you've ever made art, you know that there's a great benefit in that the work pays off almost right away, regardless of whether or not it sells. There's this, a psychic payoff to making something and having it work. But Van Gogh often in his writings compares his work as a painter to the work of the people that he's painting. I had to work like they did out here in the hot sun. Right? So having the palette, having the brushes is not only a debt to remember it, right? But it's also this self-conception of him as an artist who works. Now, of the 22 self-portraits he's involved in, he was only in Paris for like a year and a half, right? And of the self-portraits that he got, 22 of them, this is the very last one. And many people point to it as reflecting exactly how he felt when he left Paris, which was pretty freaking miserable. He hated it. He hated the bustle. He hated the amount of energy it took to simply live there. The effects of industry. As a preacher's son, I imagine that all the sin on the Montmartre probably got under his skin as well. I have to do some more research into his letters to find that out for sure. But look at him. He is burned out, huh? Looks like some of you guys do. So get closer to test week. Red-eyed, pulled an all-nighter the night before. Look at the red around his pupils. Phenomenal, right? This guy's been up for a couple days. And he hasn't really lost it yet. You guys all know the biography of Van Gogh, right? He's gonna lose his mind. He's gonna twice over put himself into an asylum, check himself into a mental institution to be healed. Because his brother will set him up with a doctor outside of Paris because he's off, right? He's not there yet. He's just physically worn down. And he decides to move out of Paris. And coming from this gray, gloomy environment, where the sun don't shine very much in Holland and Belgium, north of France, he decides to move to the south of France, the sunny south of France, down to the city of Arles, which is right near Marseille, a little close to Marseille, right in the heart of Provence. Sunny 300 plus days out of the year, colorful like nobody's business, sunflowers, wheat fields, lavender, cypresses. Smells great. He's going to get well. He's going to rest up. Not only physically get well, but artistically feel up. Right? And here's a picture from Provence of what it's like for him. This just must have been this amazing blast of health, both physical health, but also artistic health as he gets down to Provence, where the sun-drenched fields, the rustic, we call these a mas, right? We've known that from Cézanne at MAS. This kind of large rural estate, working estate with the stone walls around. It must have been a wonderful place. And you can almost, if you've ever been to Provence, you can hear it, you can smell it from just looking at his pictures. And look at how the colors have just opened up. They've exploded. If you think back to the tulip fields that we had, where all of the colors were based on local observation, there's still some root of that here. But at the same time, he looks at those flowers less as something that he has to observe and depict, and more of these sort of, they're like fireworks that are popped out and exploded in front of that wall. And if you look at the gray wall, you'll notice there isn't a lick of gray on it anywhere. It's lavender and pink and blue and orange and green. It's phenomenal. It's just reveling in the sights, the sounds, the colors of the South of France. It's one of my favorite pictures in the National Gallery. This is a beautiful, beautiful picture. It's nice outlined with the orange tile roofs with the opposite on the color wheel, right? With the dark blue for the shadow. It's not a black shadow, it's a blue shadow. And again, he's choosing these opposites, the blue windows against the orange walls, right? You get down below, even in the wall itself, and have a detail of that wall. You get these speckles of orange and blue next to each other against that sort of lavender tone that he's using for most of it, right? But there's that lesson that he got from Seurat about how complementary colors vibrate on the surface, right? Now, nobody had talked about complementary colors before. They didn't think about them that way. But he's aware of how much it makes it just fizzle. And for Van Gogh, this is because he's trying to capture the sense of sort of, it's oppressively hot there. Oppressively hot in Provence. It just sits on you, and it's not as humid as it is here. It is just really bakes, right? And so the things that grow there often have to be either heavily cultivated by farmers, hard work, or they are the kinds of plants that survive anything, right? Like olive trees, which don't really need to be tended. They can grow on rocks, you know? They can grow anywhere, right? So there's this hard scrabble nature to the land itself that sits under this baking sunlight that he's trying to capture by giving it this scintillating vibration of colors. Even on the edge of my detail on the right, you can see where he's brought in just that little bit of green there next to the orange as well. That's sort of bright Kelly lime green right on the edge of my detail. Or how he's made up the bush behind it of these yellows and blues and reds. These fantastic pictures, right? And again, that thick paint application that translates eventually out of his love of Rembrandt early on, but filtered through an understanding of color that he picked up from Pissarro that owes its genesis to Seurat. Right? So all these things coming together in his works. This is a little blurry now that we have it big, but you can see the degree to which he's laying down these colors. I love that detail of the green. Well, here, I can use my little pen all day. This bit here, right? That part where he's come back and he's washed in the green, he comes over the top, and it's almost as if that red is going to be the bud of the flower itself. That he understands this physical property of the paint to become something three-dimensional rather than just, he's not drawing anymore. It's almost like he's sculpting. And everywhere you look, if you look just above that, you can see that he continues this area where he's, giving you all of these oranges against these blues. Everywhere you look, absolutely fantastic. Another thing I wanted to point to here, and we'll see it in a couple of other places, is the vigor of the paint application, how the energy with which Van Gogh places it down. And there's a good chance that he, too, is working very deliberately and not particularly quickly, but there's something about the energy that looks, fast and easy. You gotta hate him for it almost, because he makes it look so darn easy. How those are just the right strokes for the bush. But the paint is so thick that you can see some of the areas have been flattened out on the top even, where the paint is skinned and then gotten flattened as well. You'll see this in a couple of other details. No part of it is left unpainted. Even the stony path that leads up to the gate on this farmhouse, you can see has been painted, and not in a way that reflects a movement in space. Right? Not in a way that seems to push us back toward the gate, but in a way that is a dialogue between Van Gogh and the surface that he's painting. look at all the places where the paint is so thick that as it dried and rested against another canvas, it squashed out. Can you see that? Look right here. And you see that the thickness of that yellow, that sort of umber yellow that he's using, has eventually grown a skin, as oil paint will, right? It rises from the outside in, so it gets hard on the outside while it's still greasy on the inside. You can pop it like a zit. Sorry, Taylor, it's a bad analogy, but you get the idea, right? You can squeeze it out of there like paint out of a tube. How's that? That's better. Or toothpaste out of a tube. But he's rested it on the canvas against it. And the canvas weave has impressed itself on the outside of that highest crust of the drying paint. The best scene on this guy, I just love this figure. And every time I look at it, I see something I hadn't seen last time. The audacity of painting in this way. But the last time I looked at this, the thing I saw I hadn't seen before is how he treats the transition between those purple trousers, which is, by the way, the same color he's using in the wall, right? But how he treats the transition between the purple trousers and the wheat field that he's working. And I think he's meant to be conceived of as somebody not just walking through the field, but probably working the field, maybe with a scythe, right? But those licks of that electric green, where his tent legs disappear into the grass, right? He didn't shade it or anything like that, but and there's one of the same shot of that color underneath his left hand as well, which so from a distance, look at those, now go from there, look at the thing on the left, and you see it almost all but disappear. But they have an effect, right? They have an impact, right? And how he's actually painted both the figure and then come back over the top of it with the wheat. And then all the places where you can see the thick paint has been squashed by the canvas that's sitting next to it, right? Look at his left leg, down where it disappears into the grass. Look at his butt, right? And you can see, that's why I first noticed it when I was looking at this picture, that the thickness of the paint on his rear end has been impressed with the grain, not of the canvas that it's sitting on, but on the canvas that he stacked it next to in the studio, as they laid next to each other, right? Just really incredible paint application, and thick and vigorous. I should mention he's broke as can be, but his brother's pretty rich. And Theo, right? And they have an ongoing dialogue. They're really close. Theo's an art dealer back in Paris, and Van Gogh writes to him regularly, and the letters are all preserved. And I just on the website this morning when I was putting this thing together, that goes through all of his letters, and it highlights what paintings he's talking about when he's writing to his brother, and what he has to say about them, right? And I have a quote about this one. I thought it was really great. He talks about doing 7 paintings of workers in the hot sun. And this is where, as I mentioned before, he compares his work to their work. He says, these landscapes, this is now his own words, landscapes, he wrote in French, right? Landscapes, yellow, old gold, done quickly, and in a hurry, just like the harvester who was silent under the blazing sun, intent only on the reaping. He thinks that he's reaping as well, and his job is to glean something from that landscape in the same way that a harvester does. Take something valuable from it, get on before the sun is so hot that it kills you. Right? His work as a painter, especially as a landscape painter, is the same as the people who work the land. He's a laborer. Right? He doesn't have any false pretensions about his work. And that said, it's important to note that he's not making a dime at this point. His stuff's just not selling back in Paris. But he keeps sending these lots of pictures, a group of pictures back to Theo to sell in Paris, and he explains sort of things he's doing with them, what he intends with them, what he's thinking as he's painting. It's fascinating stuff. I may spend part of my summer next summer just going through the letters. That sounds like a fun way. Beats the heck out of Facebook. Way to spend your summer looking at something online. Great drawings from this period as well. This one's fantastic, right? Again, images of harvesting, where just as his paint work is so vigorous and varied across the surface, So too his pen work is the same way. That he totally understands the kind of effect you get with these perfectly horizontal or vertical strokes versus a series of dots that utterly capture a sense of three-dimensional space. And I think that's what, for me, one of the things I really like about Van Gogh is for all of the attention that we even pay to the surface, right, how the paint sits on the canvas, you still never lose sight of the sort of structural three-dimensionality of the stuff. Like, there's no doubt on how that wall moves back into space, even though it's given it that really odd blue outline, sort of right around there, right? He's given us that blue outline. That's very artificial. There's no doubt how that sort of bends back into space, how that road comes up this way, and then cuts back through that gate, right? What the plane of the gate that's open is, and how it moves back now towards the house in the background, where the person is relative to the stone wall, how the fields themselves, in fact, here, how the space steps back through a series of steps. And his drawing tries the exact same thing. So here in the foreground, these short hedgerows of the area that's already been sized, right, as the meat has been cut down, gives you the sense of steps back in space. So it's lost, right? It's perfectly understandable where that group of batch is relative to that part, right? How far back it is to this figure here, or these figures here. The alpheal, or as it's called, short house, the little house, the alpheal in the background, the city here. It sort of invites you, right, to work your way back into the landscape. And usually cities, it's sort of like looking at a path that has steps. And you just want to even walk back through here, right? I can get back into the landscape. And it's, you know, kind of like, like 12 or so. But you want to dive into it, and I think that the sense of helps this, right? It gives you want to sort of scrutinize it and immerse yourself into it. So again, it's Van Gogh's ongoing interest in work, in labor, in peasant labor, in harvesting. Just as they're harvesting their grain, he's harvesting imagery, right? This was out on display recently, so I got some really good pictures of it. He emphasizes our distance from any kind of civilization, right? Any kind of urbanization, by giving us the walls of the city back there, or even just it's a small town, right? And here out in the countryside, we just have scattered buildings. And a landscape that is controlled by man, but in harmony with it at the same time. And then just how with the simplest of strokes he can capture, the horse with the cart, the man tending it behind, the other man on the back of the cart, right, standing on top of the hay bale, as it's come to rest here by the ramparts of an old wall. How we move further back, and he gives us this wonderful cart with a horse and two figures walking up that line that we now assume to be a path, right? Yeah, all of these things invite us to sort of work our way into the landscape. I'll end today with another comparison back to Rembrandt, because again, this concept of a landscape that works through these sort of foreground lines that are made up of these vertical hatches, and sort of eventually lead your way through with this very stiff reed pen back into the sort of activity in the landscape that is so in harmony with that landscape, is something that Van Gogh channels. Now, I don't know if he ever saw Rembrandt drawing up close. My guess is he didn't. But there's every chance that he saw reproductions, because as he's beginning to investigate these things, he begins to then look for them, right? But I don't know how much drawings were on display in the 19th century. Still, I think there's too much of a similarity to how he works the landscape. The conventions he uses to engage you with it, the way in which it works its way slowly back on a gentle sort of zigzag to the distant line of the horizon. It's far too similar to the way that Rembrandt works to have it just be coincidence. Right? This is an etching by Rembrandt, which is in many ways almost a better comparison. where each of them is interested in how the landscape sort of stretches out across how our agricultural work stretches out across the landscape, how we have signs of civilization in the deep horizon, in both cases in the left corner, and how the artist has given us through these strokes that vary across the canvas or across the paper, give us this invitation to work our way back into the landscape and look for things that we might find. So Rembrandt gives us these figures working the fields here as well. Again, rendered with just the simplest of strokes that are so evocative of exactly how it looks and feels on that particular day. So Rembrandt remains, I think, for Van Gogh, this champion, this hero, this role model to try to live up to throughout his career, and his drawings here in the south of France also emphasize that. Right. Okay, we will finish Van Gogh off, so to speak, on Friday. We have a reading for Friday that talks about sort of his mental capacity and how that might have affected his view of some of the motifs that he paints, some of which we haven't looked at yet. But we'll sort of look, we're 2 years before he dies. And we'll look at those sort of last 2 years, both in the south of France and then back around Paris, where he ends up killing himself on Friday. Okay? So make sure as you're doing everything else to read this article as well. And we'll talk about that on Friday. Okay?